This is Bill Clifford, President and CEO of the World Affairs Councils of America in Washington, D.C. We're delighted to present to you today August's Cover to Cover. We have a special guest. Her name is Mei Xu. She is a Chinese-American entrepreneur and author of the book Burn: How Grit, Innovation, and a Dash of Luck Ignited a Multi-million-dollar Success Story. This is a monthly program. I want to say that we just learned that we have a special second August edition that will be August 31st with the Washington Post investigative reporter Craig Whitlock on his groundbreaking book, Afghanistan Papers. Now, Mei Xu founded 3 global companies, the most famous of which is Chesapeake Bay Candle. She sold that to Newell Brands in 2017, but put together just an amazing journey of innovation and entrepreneurship, empowering women leaders along the way. She has also recently started a new venture called Yes She May, which is an e-commerce platform that focuses on helping women-owned consumer product companies grow and prosper. This was not featured so much in her book Burn, but we're going to talk about that as well. Mei, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Council. I was actually briefly involved with the World Affairs Council, and I really respect the work you do, particularly now as the world faces such big challenges. There is no better effort than to try to understand the cultural differences and try to stand together.
Well, I appreciate that. And you're referencing, I know you served on the board of our DC affiliate and also friends who are at councils that run the U.S. State Department's International Visitor Leadership Program. You were also on the board of Meridian International, among many others. If I listed your philanthropic associations, we'd chew up the hour, I'm sure. But feel free to discuss those as we commence the conversation. And I will bring in our audience at about 20 minutes from now. Mei, you were born in Hangzhou, China in 1967, a year after the Cultural Revolution started. You came of age after Mao passed away in 1976, and China embarked on a market-oriented style of socialism under Deng Xiaoping. Your family, in other words, straddled quite an epic history of modern China. Can you talk about growing up there and what impelled you to emigrate to the United States in 1991?
Thank you, Bill. When I was writing the book Burn, I was trying to reflect not only on my personal journey as an immigrant coming from China. It is also my goal to reflect on what it was like to actually reflect on the journey the country had gone along the same period of time. It's very interesting you mentioned that I was born in 1967. A lot of you would know that is the peak of the Cultural Revolution. So I was growing up in one China, which is very closed, very phonetic in many ways, and ideologically speaking, very one-sided. I was growing up with everyone pretty much being paid the same way, working for the government or the organizations that are owned by the government. And it was very black and white. We were always, able to go to school, but the content of the education was very concentrated on the point of view of the government. Until in 1972, when China and US had somewhat of a exploration of normalization. And then, as you probably remember, Nixon visited China, and it's becoming the week that changed the world. China finally agreed to open and reversing its 2 or 3 decade long isolation and hostility. And as a result of that, many things followed. We all know the economic reform championed by Deng Xiaoping, but what is little known to many Americans and people living outside of China is the amount of changes that the country prepared itself in order to become a fully engaged country. Case in point is that the government realized that they do not have very well-educated foreign diplomatic serving the country. And they realized waiting for kids to go to college and start learning the language is too late. So they decided to set up 8 middle and high schools in 8 cities around the country so that kids can get enrolled at 12 and start to learn foreign language and culture so that they can be better prepared. So in 1979, I was 12. I was just graduating in Hangzhou from primary school. And I was able to participate in a citywide entrance exam that ended up picking 80 students out of tens of thousands of students, and became the first group of students that enrolled in what will be an immersion language training program. So we would be actually also boarding, even though my family is in the city. They understand the importance of the immersion language education. So we were actually living 6 days a week in school, where we have teachers from England, from the United States, from Canada, where English is native, so that we're not only learning the language, we're living the language. We watch a lot of movies. I remember one of them was actually Godfather when we were only 13. And as you can imagine, from a very jaded, protected society to all of a sudden watching all the content on a movie like Godfather was quite a shift. And I'm not even sure if it's appropriate for 13-year-old to watch those, but they were very open about letting the kids learn what they need to learn in order to understand how the world operates. So that was 6 years of very intensive training, and then 4 more years in Beijing. I was in preparing.
We're at a foreign studies university, a very
Right.
elite school.
It's a very elite school focusing on diplomacy and foreign studies and foreign literature. It probably produced the most diplomats for China, a lot of the ambassadors. It also boasts over 300 foreign languages that it teaches. So it's pretty expensive in the range of foreign languages it is able to follow and offer. So when I was enrolled in Beijing, as you can imagine, I was a little bit more advanced than most of the average students who did not get immersion education, who did not ever studied under native teachers. So my professor, who was a visiting professor from Dartmouth College, introduced me to her then husband to help the World Bank mission in Beijing to translate for their mission when they go to different remote areas in China. So that was my first exposure working for international and global organizations, and I really enjoyed that.
So Mei, you were training, you wanted to be a diplomat. You were at perhaps the best university to become a diplomat. You were working with people at the World Bank and the UN to do the work of diplomacy. Why didn't you follow through? What made you shift to a career in business?
I just need to mention one idea, one thing, and you probably would understand. So I really liked the work, and I worked throughout my university years until 1989. I graduated in July 1989, and if you recall, Tiananmen Square was in June of
Yes.
1989. Because of where the graduating year, basically everyone was asked to move outside of major cities so that we are not going to create even more gathering. Therefore, my dream of continually working for the World Bank was dashed, along with everyone else's dream. We were all assigned places to work already, before this happened, but as we graduate and as the country trying to move beyond what happened in Tiananmen Square, we were all sent away. Some of us went to factories, some went to military, military base to work with the soldiers, and I was sent into a remote area for warehousing for China's export of minerals in Dalian, which is northeast of China. And that was very difficult because I realized for the first month that not only would I not be able to listen or to speak English, I was much by myself. There was a big warehouse. I was there alone with my boss, who doesn't even speak Chinese to me. He's a chain smoker, and he's just always, listening to some radios that has they're telling a novel. So I was drawn crazy. I said, this is not going to work for me because I have spent 10 years practicing, and I will not let my English and my future being ruined because of this 1 year. And looking back, it already showed you a little bit of this ambitious and rebellious sort of person that I didn't realize it was me. I was always a very good student. I was always very much of a model student, you can say. I took care of my own business. My mom and dad never have to chase me for. I'm a very self-motivated person because you probably read about that. I came from a family background where we have to prove the worthiness, right? My parents came from what they would consider capitalists or landowners. So in communist China, you can imagine we're not considered the good family. So we have to prove our worthiness. And I was a very motivated and self-driven child. But that setup for me was just very miserable. So I resigned.
Was it difficult for you to tell your
Very
parents you were
emotional.
leaving?
Yeah, it was very emotional because I have to tell my parents, who work all their life for the government, never moved, maybe just once when they were first working somewhere. They were then resigned to some different location, but that they only moved once in their lifetime. So for them, having their own daughter basically say no to a career of diplomacy with the government, it is unheard of. Not only that, I don't have a job lining up for me anywhere. I have to go back to Beijing. I was determined to come to study in the US. So I went back to become basically self-employed, right? Imagine that was 1989 in China. The word self-employed is usually equivalent to criminals or people without education, or, I don't know. It's usually the people that not is so desirable, they cannot even find a job. So what is available was for me to teach English to parents who want their children to do well, or I can teach English to hotel managers who now have a lot of English speakers in their hotel, and I can teach them, particularly their written English is not bad. It's usually the listening and the oral English is not as good. So that's what I did for about a year as I was gathering my document, my paper, my credentials. It was a very big amount of task. Yesterday, I was listening to the despair of the women being interviewed by CNN about how difficult it was at this moment in Afghanistan to gather documents so that they can get a visa and then to go to another country. And I was almost in tears because that was me. It's not so much the chaos in China at that time. It was just so difficult. Citizens are not normally allowed to have a passport. Only when you are traveling for your work, you get a official passport. Personal private passport is very hard to come by. At that time, there is no tourism. The only reason you do that is when you have a family member that you want to visit, or you have a family member that invited you and sponsor you to study. So that was my case. I'm going to be studying in the US, and I have family members in Canada, and that's how I have to go about getting a lot of chops, a lot of stamps, and you really have to count them. And it was a very difficult, sometimes you gave up and you feel you need to go because someone said the order of the way you fill the form was wrong and you need to refill it. Remember, this is not on the computer. This is a piece of paper. And then you have to go to the first company or first, department to issue you a new blank form and get all the chops again that has been
I'm
there.
sure that
I
I'm
cannot tell you.
I'm
I
sure the
cannot tell you.
perseverance and the resilience
I'm.
uh,
It came from that. Yes.
infused your
I don't say
entrepreneurship.
this very often. Corny, my colleagues here. I don't think she ever heard me talking because I'm not a complainer, but I actually feel so sad when I heard it yesterday, because nothing has changed. It's been more than 30 years for me, but the world is still struggling for some very simple things in this country we feel that we should not even worry about. So, I remind myself yesterday not to be jaded and not to be a complainer about circumstances, because I was that person and she was still stuck there and not knowing what she can do with her life. And I'm fortunate because I have been living here, and it is what makes me feel I need to do more, because there is so much to be done.
Let's talk about your unique story, your unique American dream. You probably had a good period at University of Maryland to study journalism and get over your culture shock. Is as good a place to do it as any, I'm sure.
Mhm.
What was it that turned you into the risk taker that would start a candle business that grew incredibly through a really interesting period of time too, because this was you came in early in 1991, and then by the mid 90s you're starting this company when a lot of other people are saying the future is the internet and retail is going to be in trouble, but you did this. What was the spark? What was the burn?
Again, actually, sometimes I was wondering, my editor, she's such a supportive editor from Wiley. She's the one that has the idea to use the word luck, because I think both of us know that I have been very lucky to be able to grow my business, but there are also circumstances that really I was very unlucky. So the first graduation, I had Tiananmen Square. The second graduation, in University of Maryland, I graduated in 1991, which is the first Gulf War. If everybody remember, the war with Iraq for Kuwait. And because I want to work for the World Bank, I applied there. And that's exactly why I was in Maryland. I was able to get accepted in quite a few places, including a few good universities in California. But I was very determined to come to Maryland because of the World Bank being here in DC. So I applied and they said, we are the biggest, United States is the biggest donor, supporter to the World Bank financially. When it's in war, we're not getting what we needed financially from the country, and we have to put a freeze for most of our hiring. Find something to do, May, and then come back and apply. So that again is, I would say, a very unfortunate moment. It reminded me of last year, the graduating year of last year. Probably felt that way because they are graduating in the middle of the pandemic and companies cannot interview them. So that's what I have. So I, basically have not much choices, as you know, as a new settler, a new immigrant. You have very limited choices for survival and for a legitimate work permit for you to go through. I eventually found a job in New York. So I started to commute because I was married then. My husband was working in Washington, D.C. and couldn't move. So I had to move every weekend. Basically, I came home every weekend to visit him. And I did this for more than a year. It was not the most inspiring job, but it was a job that allowed me for the first time to get involved in business outside of the World Bank kind of policy and international organization. It's a medical equipment export company, exporting very high-tech product for mammogram or for CTs and ultrasound to Chinese hospitals and other third world countries, but mostly China, because as you remember, 1990 is a time when the country was catching up. It realized its own disadvantage and backwardness of the facilities. So they're trying to modernize the hospitals. I was there as someone to assist marketing with all the major companies like GE, and I was working with Acuson, Space Labs in California. But my job was very mundane. It was really pushing papers, right? There was a lot of export documentations, application for Import-Export Bank, and that's mostly what I do. And it's not something that I feel they want me to grow. They just want me to do as much paper and speak as less as possible. Right, don't speak, just do things. And what it does let me, and a lot of people that know my story know this, is that I was put in a hotel because my home was in DC during the week. And that hotel happened to be not far from Bloomingdale's, the flagship store near Columbus Circle. And that is my only escape. So every day I finish my dinner by myself. I would stroll to the Bloomingdale stores. And I love when they give me the spray of a new fragrance. I love to try the new things on the first floor. But what I really, really like to see is the fashion floor. It's on the second floor. And you started to see the brands that emerged at that time in the early 1990s. You have Calvin Klein, you have Donna Karan, you already have Ralph Lauren, but what I remembered would be Calvin Klein and Donna Karan, because they have women's wear that use menswear fabric, and it's tailored very feminine shape, but the material and the color is very powerful, and it's much more simplified and much more, to me, fresh and contemporary. And it is the kind of aesthetics that really I've always gravitate towards. So I love that that is here, and it's not always floral or bright. It's almost strong in a sense. And I see those women walking around in black. So you remember, women in New York like to wear black, but they look great and they look very confident. And so this is the moment, I would say, that really changed my life. Yes, Tiananmen Square changed my life. Coming to study at the University of Maryland in many ways shaped who I am. But the moment that really made me who I am today, thankfully, was those very random shopping trips. So I keep telling parents, don't let your children feel bad when they are shopping, because you never know what is going to come out of those shopping. Not that I was spending money. I barely make $19,000 a year before tax, right? It was really lowly paid immigrants. So I couldn't afford anything, not even a bottle of perfume. But I was window shopping. I was imagining how the person wearing this feel when they realize it's the same fabric as menswear, and how luxurious but powerful that statement is. And then I would go up and there will be some, active wear, sports wear, and then you have shoes, and then you have children. And then on the very top, I think it's 7th or the 8th floor, is home. And every time I went there, I just couldn't believe myself. I said, this looks like a home in the 1800s, you know. It's so mundane. The color is very sleepy, and the furnitures are very ornate with a little bit gilded touch. I just don't understand why a woman that usually saw on the street with that Donna Karen very sharp tailored suit would go home to a grandmother's apartment. So every night when I talked to my husband David, I started talking about this discrepancy and this very odd imbalance. And finally, because we were doing this commuting thing for such a long time and I was very bored, one day he just said, Mei, I think we need to quit because this is something you talk to me all the time. And I'm seeing that the US, China is doing so much exchange and import and export. Why don't we do something with that? So that was really his entrepreneur sort of spirit more than mine. I think I have the eyes, I see the opportunity, but if it's myself, I may not have the gut to say, let's do that. But we did. So in 1994, we both quit our jobs and moved back to DC, and we started our business in September. Not much later after we quit.
You didn't expect candles until you were seeing the demand for them at trade shows, and you seem to have a knack for identifying gaps, like you described the mundane quality of the home floor at Bloomie's. You seize on gaps and what you call pain points for consumers as being opportunities to develop brand new collections and so forth. So what do you think it was that allowed Chesapeake Candle to take off from what was really just mixing wax in your basement at one point to a multi-million-dollar enterprise?
Well, I think the first thing you mentioned probably was one of the drivers is that I was not trained as an artist, but I was always growing up very attracted by beautiful things and art. We were very fortunate to be given the education we were given. So at 12 and beyond, we already started watching a lot of movies. We learned a lot of Renaissance art. We studied a lot of poetry and writing. So I think I was giving a very good education. On top of that, when you are immigrant and when you are new to a culture, I feel the social scanning ability is a little bit on top alert because you also want to be very mindful to not offend certain ways or not break certain rules. So you're very aware of your environment and you are more than invested to make the most of your situation. So for me, I noticed that about myself. I'm actually very sensitive. So even the temperature grows 2%, 2 degrees, I would be able to tell. So what I did, instead of being anxious about those discoveries and those notice, is I turn them into insight, right? Rather than just say, oh, somehow I noticed this, but it doesn't really matter. I started to ask why. I really like to ask this why. And I realized that fashion and art, well, the way that trend starts is usually at the very high level. It starts with actually art, right? If you go to Art Basel or if you go to contemporary galleries, you notice that they're the ones that start experimenting. And then it trickles down into high fashion. And then it trickles down to fine fragrance, a lot of the packaging, and only then it trickles down to home. So what I noticed is actually not that there is a true gap. It's the time difference between when fashion is in full-flung contemporary mood. Family and home fashion has not caught on yet. Eventually, it will happen. And I see that gap. I didn't understand why there is a gap, but I can definitely see that there will be an acceptance, even a longing for that point of view, the point of view that is simplified, is fresher, that is gender neutral, that is more cosmopolitan. Those are the things that people have been looking for. They just couldn't find it. And I'm very good at identifying either when there's a geographic barrier that hasn't brought something to another location, or the time is not right. And for me, I never look at making candles as only a wick and a holder. It's, to me, an expression, right? It's about expressing something. So we're using wax and glasses and fragrances to express a mood or an ambiance, just like fashion designers using fabric, structure, and human body to express something else. It's like artists using brushes and paintings and paper. We're all expressing things. So in that way, you don't look at yourself so much as a lane. You just want to share what you want to express in that manner.
Well, chapter by chapter of your memoir, Burn, you identify food,
right,
and the way you discuss the use of fragrance in particular in the manufacturing of the candles made me think this woman could be a wine expert. It's the same sort of language and the same incredible variety of blending grapes and having the vocabulary to discuss
right,
smell as opposed to taste.
exactly.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Look, we're halfway through, and I want to bring the audience in as well. There's so much we haven't touched on yet, including kind of the global economic journey you experienced,
Mm-hmm.
and not just getting your venture off the ground, but also the supply chain issues with China and Vietnam,
Right.
how you met President Obama on his inshoring advisory panel when you brought Chesapeake Bay Candle back to Maryland. Of course, your Yes She May venture now launched at the height of the pandemic. That's really interesting too. Not covered in the book, as I mentioned, but I want to ask one particular question before I turn it over to my colleagues around the country, and that is, as an Asian American, we've seen, particularly in the last several months, and instigated by none other than the former occupant of the White House, a rise in hate crimes. And I wonder to what extent you've experienced a share of what is a long history of racism towards Asians and Asian Americans in this country, as an immigrant, as a business leader. How did you become impacted by attitudes like that, and what you've commented, you've written about this earlier this spring?
Yes, I did shared an op-ed on CNN.com about what I call bamboo ceiling, the lack of leadership in politics and in business by Asian Americans. It's actually detrimental to our competitiveness as a country. When I was here, I'm very aware that my look definitely stand out, particularly where some of the classes, most of the Chinese students came to study science and technology. There was no one that is going to take journalism, particularly because I'm also paying for the tuition. So I'm very aware that in many of those situations, I would be the only women, and sometimes the only Chinese women. This follows me the entire career as well. As you become more and more successful, some of those events that I participated, I would be the only woman or the only particularly Asian woman. Or on a board, I've been on a few boards where I would be the only Asian and Asian women. So there is obvious, petrifying. I would have people coming to me and always ask me, where are you from? And after living here for 30 years, sometimes I just say Maryland. No, 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 I'm just saying where you're from. And I said Maryland, because I think they want me to say I come from another country. And I think people don't realize how racist this question itself is. I don't know if people ever ask you, Bill, to say, if you say I come from New York or I come from New Jersey, they say, no, no, no. I mean, what part of Scotland you come from? Or
Yes, yeah,
what part?
yeah.
So there is that way of putting you down without without actually giving themselves excuses. So I have learned to shoot back and say, do you have a problem? To remind them it's very condescending to continually push people. But that's not the biggest concern. The biggest concern is sometimes people pretend I don't even exist. I was testifying about government role in bringing jobs back, particularly in manufacturing, in front of Congress. And I was invited by a congressman from South Carolina. And he actually invited me to join him and his colleague, obviously all Republicans, to dinner afterwards. And I thought it was a very nice gesture. So I joined them. And as they talk, I think they completely forgot, I was probably not happy with the topic, or, I'm not even consulted on my ideas. It was like I was just attending a dinner for the sake of dinner. They talk among themselves and they never say, what do you think, Mei? And I was the only entrepreneur that was there. Everyone else are politicians, right? So I don't even understand why they invited me if I'm not given a chance to speak. If it's a man or a different kind of race, I'm sure that they would at least have the courage to, or the courtesy to look at me and say, what do you think? You were testifying about these situations. What is your idea? So, but I never had time to sort of feel sad for myself. That is something I probably should have done more. I probably should have, become more aware that this kind of treatment probably is more prevalent than not. So this spring, when what happened in Atlanta started this whole Asian American hate crime awareness, it also woke me up. It made me feel that as an Asian American women leader, I do need to do my part. I do need to raise my hand and stop whatever I don't like instead of just being quiet. Some of it, I think, Bill, I think I shared with you, it's culture, right? We grow up to be very non-confrontational, particularly in person. We don't want to make others feel uncomfortable. But I don't think it's okay for others to make us uncomfortable either. We have to share that enough is enough. But until I feel we all understand representation in the highest level by Asian Americans is good for this country, because a lot of the business and politics and international relations are based on relations with those countries where we come from. With us supporting and being in the decision power, it only helps the country, not the other way around. So I feel that it's a very important moment to be awakened and to be very sensitive to, not just Asians, but other minorities, and what is their identity and how we can respect that identity and draw strength from that identity.
Thank you for saying that. I noticed that Mary Mendoza of Boston had a comment, not a question, but those are welcome as well too, regarding the gender biases that happen. You just by your example and the people you employ and the e-commerce platform that you launched last summer have given women, I'm sure, an incredible example of confidence and possibility, and you've mentored. What do you advise young women who are interested in pursuing a career path like yours, who are creators, who are wanting it all in business and also a family?
I'm not sure if I'm really able to advise on everything, but one of the things that I have heard people asking me is, how do you know you're ready to become an entrepreneur? Or how do you know if you are the kind of person that can succeed? And I always say, if you don't try to be one, you will only regret. So start from doing things instead of just debating. The second thing is, I think we probably are in the best time for starting a business, because with the disruption of almost everything, I do feel the opportunity to create businesses that answer the needs. I was just trying to do some invitation card, and I was told that because no one has been printing invitation card, that it's going to take almost 3 weeks and very expensive amount. So there's all these business opportunities. How can we make kids learn better if they are continually going to be learning some of it online? Or how can we use the online learning to offer classes that in other countries that they can learn as well, particularly imagine in countries like Afghanistan, where women and girls cannot go to school. How can we give them education so they don't end up being unable to read? So these are for-profit and non-profit ideas that is scattered around because of the huge disruption. And rather than looking at this as such a sad moment, I think those of us who want to do things should seek the chances to make something out of it. Last thing I would say for women in particular is that you don't have to wait for yourself to get all your degrees. You don't have to wait for you to have all the savings. You don't even have to wait for others to give you a signal. You need to give your own signal to put your hat in the ring, because no one else is going to give you that okay, or give you an award or recognition, or nominate you for something if you are not feeling ready for that. And I feel we sometimes evaluate ourselves and want to judge ourselves if we're ready for that job, that promotion. But men don't really think that way, right? Most of the time they think they're overqualified. So we need to think like a man when it's about promotions, and take the opportunity, put the hat in the ring for some recognition. It's time.
On the many boards you've served, how do you see them addressing issues like diversity, equity, and inclusion? Is there progress? Because some of the statistics that you mentioned in your article on race were startling to me. That I think it was the Harvard Business Review that
Right.
showed how many Asian Americans, men or women,
Right.
made it to management levels, that they're particularly ignored.
Right.
But are you seeing from MBA degree classes to the C-suite, the boardrooms, that is it more talk, or is it actually happening?
I do feel it's very interesting, as you probably also heard. The students that are graduating with bachelor's, master's, and PhD degrees has increasingly tilted towards girls, even in some of the difficult, technology and fundamental science department. But the pace with which women are taking CEO positions or C-suite, as well as particularly making public board, has not caught up with the speed where we graduate women. And I feel there is a lack again. One of the reasons I believe is that there is no incentives for board to be rewarded if they have more diversity. In European countries, public board has to have more than 25% women on board. We don't have such a requirement. So I feel the club system where people nominate their friends or people they know to each other's board has continued, even though there has been some movement. So I also feel that the women that are graduating definitely are more qualified now than they were 30, 40, 50 years ago. They are told they're ready, but I'm not sure if the change that we want to see for the longest time has happened yet. I personally don't see that.
As an entrepreneur who's had to approach venture capitalists, I have a question from Megan Smith, who notes that a lot of venture capitalists may refuse to even hear pitches from women or Asian Americans. And how have you noticed that your e-commerce platform, Yes She May, is dealing with women-owned business that are outside the U.S., right?
Right, and inside, so it's
Yeah.
international, yes.
Okay. How is the VC picture changing so that they're accessing funds on a more level playing field?
So it is a very good question, and you raised a very good point, is that in the particular area of venture funding, women get only 2 to 6% of the funding versus men. And women are being told no more than men. And particularly last year, I think the numbers seems to going backward, not forward. That being said, I do feel a new momentum is shaping with fund that wants to not only invest in women, some of them are only invested in women. And I participate in one of them. It's called SOGAO, SOGAO. It actually started by 2 millennial women, and they are really breaking the barriers to find consumer products that are set up by women, technology, healthcare, and they're very successful. So I feel because of the challenges by traditionally men-run venture fund having a difficult time to invest in women-owned business more and more. There's a female founders fund that was actually based in Boston, I believe, that invested in only women-owned business. Melinda Gates has a fund called, now I can't pivot or something. It's also mostly for women. So I do see the groundswell of that awareness. And frankly, I think, the data point is that women-owned business actually are more profitable. They actually give better returns on investment. They give better returns as a small business, as a venture, and as a major business. So I really hope the message is not about taking more risk, so invest in women, is that trust yourself because you'll be rewarded.
Well, and no doubt the perspective contributes to innovation in ways that, without a woman's perspective on things, you have less. Mm-hmm. Certainly. I'd be very curious to know if you were to be a young lady in China today, where the Chinese dream is being advocated by President Xi and the party in general. Would you think that that's a China that you should leave, where there are many billionaires and the development, especially since since the beginning of the millennium, as China was inducted into the WTO, has this, the World Trade Organization, is this a China that you would want to emigrate from?
That's a very loaded question, Bill. I know that, from a geopolitical perspective, I probably will never be able to return to China, because when I left, I felt that fundamentally if I have a chance, I would not want to subject myself to that kind of scrutiny and that kind of control. So the answer would be no. I do want to add, though, that I think the idea of a China dream may have been a little bit misunderstood by Westerners or Americans or Europeans, because there's a emphasis that this is about becoming a geopolitical power against the US for the rest of the world. There may be an element of that. I'm sure that it's within the ideology to reach that supreme power. China was very proud to mention that many hundreds of years ago, it has a very profound impact in civilization. I do want to remind everyone that there was a very painful period for them for the last 200 years, where the rest of the world went through a very successful industrial revolution, where middle class started to emerge, where lifestyle started to blossom, and poverty and quality of life and health were much improved. Nothing like that happened in China. Instead, they plunged into darkness because of the invasion of different countries, including UK, because of the bringing in of the opium that corrupted generations of Chinese, and because they are still being called the sick man in China, in Asia. That image has come back because of President Trump, because of the China virus, that it's imprinted in their national conscious. It's a shame, it's a chapter that they cannot forget. Not to mention the Japanese invasion during the Second World War, where millions died. They never set up a memorial to really count who has lost lives, what kind of situations they live. They should, rather than feeling unfinished with that business, they should put up a memorial. They should probably mourn properly so that they can discover a new kind of respect for peace and security and diplomacy. So in my view, I'm both sad and relieved that they found a way to build their country back, or our country back. I still hope that one day I would be allowed a Chinese citizenship, a dual citizenship, because I love China. I think it has a lot to offer the world, and it is a very important part of the world. I just wish that it's not so black and white, that we can coexist. United States and China has the responsibility to really become the two pillars of strength, morally, economically, environmentally, because when you're in the position you're in, there's no question you have to be supportive to all the others that are not having such success. Remember, a lot of the globalization has benefited China. I can tell you that, right? Has benefited China more so than Africa or South America. And when can we understand globalization needs to lift more boats than just one country?
Well, I think we're, with luck, we'll be embarking on a new fangled globalization, particularly as it concerns an issue that you mentioned, the environment. You've been a member of the U.S.-China Business Council. I don't know if you still are, but it is clear among the policy community that relations between Beijing and Washington are at a seriously low level right now, and I wonder if business can hold the key there. There's still an interest in although there's discussions that companies may not list on each other's exchanges. But when you see things like the national security law that is totally squelched democracy in Hong Kong, it's hard to be optimistic, isn't it?
Well, it's very hard to be optimistic. I have to say, I came here during the honeymoon period. This is the lowest that I have ever seen in my lifetime, because when I started to even understand Nixon and his visit, it was when everything China does cannot possibly be wrong, because it was such an important opening. I do feel the amount of exchange between people to people has been such that even Mr. Xi has experienced living here.
Yes.
I do feel majority of Chinese and Americans want to see peace versus war, and we understand the cost of war. Just take a look at a few days worth of news. This is only Afghanistan. It's not China. So imagine if they go to war with each other, what the world would be, right? On top of that, I do feel, there are a lot of sentiments in this country where China has been stealing their intellectual property. China has been unfair in business practices. China has just taken advantage of the global supply chain and manipulated. A lot of it is actually within reason, those complaints. I'm trying to give everyone a cultural lecture. I think that I said very clearly that we are a cultural that values respect and value particularly public respect. And I'll leave it at that. When countries started to point fingers over and over, and all we hear is complaint, there's not a lot of goodwill left to collaborate. So my hope is that both countries, that's my background. At the end of the day, at the part of it, I'm a diplomat. I do believe that we're stronger when we're together, and we will not gain any advance of understanding if we continually point fingers outward. So we need each other. We are very tied together. There are families, there are, generations that have used each other's culture and goods in a way that is very hard to separate. And we have to save the world together, right? Can't just one of us save half of the world and the other destroy the other half, or try to save the other half by itself. So to me, I'm trying to really be optimistic. Bill, I think it's very hard to be optimistic at this particular moment when no one is trying to listen to another. I just sometimes think they're like children, they're yelling at each other. And all I want is to
children with very serious weaponry. As I was listening to you, I was thinking, I sure wish that there is an American, probably not someone who is an immigrant in China, but at least that there would be an American in China who, speaking Mandarin, could as eloquently express the ideas you just did about how we need to get along. I want to share with you the props that come from Elaine Deutsch, who says, "This is one amazing woman. She has so much to offer the peoples of the world." So I'm hopeful that more will read your book, Burn, because although with your fashion sense, you disguise the grit well, but the story is how grit, innovation, and a dash of luck ignited a multi-million-dollar success story. And I'm sure that your venture, Yes She May, which is a beautiful inversion of your name, Mei Xu, will succeed and do even better. It's really been
Thank
a
you,
pleasure.
Bill. It's such a pleasure, and I hope to support what your organization is doing. As you know, I'm such a fan of your work. So count on my participation in the future. And I'm so thankful to the listeners and to your very thoughtful comment. I hope that you will let me know if there's any questions from the book. And I'm very happy to share that with this last hour with all of you.